Welcome to Africa Geotrends, your window into Africa's power, progress, and geopolitics. Asterisk before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the stories shaping Africa's future. Africa just flipped the global energy story on its head, and almost nobody saw it coming. While the world kept arguing about mega power plants, giant dams, nuclear reactors, and centralized grids that take decades to build, Africa quietly started building something completely different. Not from the top down, but from the ground up. Small solar hubs lighting rural towns. Hybrid mini-grids powering farms hundreds of kilometers from national grids. Off-grid wind and storage systems fueling factories in regions where darkness used to be normal. This is not just an energy story, it's a power shift. For decades, Africa was described as energy poor, underdeveloped, or left behind. But now, the same system that made Africa late to centralized industrial electricity is becoming its greatest strategic advantage. Because while other regions are stuck upgrading old, fragile, expensive power grids, Africa is leapfrogging straight into decentralized energy dominance. A model not based on massive fossil plants, but on modular, scalable, local power. And here's the shocker. Experts aren't calling this a temporary solution anymore. They are calling it the future of energy itself. Mini-grids, hybrid systems, solar storage, and localized energy networks are now being seen as more resilient, more adaptable, and more relevant to the modern world than the centralized grids built in the 20th century. Africa isn't just catching up. Africa is redefining the system. Every solar mini-grid installed in a remote village reduces dependence on unstable national transmission lines. Every localized hybrid power unit strengthens energy sovereignty. Every decentralized system reduces vulnerability to blackouts, conflicts, and economic shocks. This isn't charity energy. This is strategic energy. And the world is paying attention because Africa's decentralized model is something that even developed nations are now trying to replicate. From California to Germany, microgrids are being tested. But Africa is doing it at scale, out of necessity, and now, out of strategy. This is why global investors, climate finance institutions, and energy companies are racing into African decentralized energy markets. They are not just bringing money, they are learning. Because Africa is becoming a live laboratory for the future of power, not through big speeches, but through practical systems that work where centralized ones failed. In a world facing climate stress, grid instability, rising urban populations, and increasing energy demand, Africa's decentralized approach is no longer a backup plan. It is becoming the blueprint. And that is why this matters far beyond Africa. Because the continent isn't just solving its own energy problem. It is designing a model the rest of the world will have to adopt sooner or later. Africa's decentralized energy rise is rooted in reality, not theory. Nearly 600 million people across sub-Saharan Africa still lack access to consistent electricity. In many regions, extending national grids is extremely expensive due to distance, terrain, low population density, and infrastructure gaps. For years, the global assumption was that Africa would eventually just expand centralized plants and power lines like Europe and North America did. But that model is proving slow, costly, and inefficient. Instead, what emerged was a different solution: mini-grids and hybrid decentralized systems. A decentralized energy system means power is generated close to where it is consumed. Solar panels on community hubs, batteries storing excess energy, wind turbines on local farmland, small hydro systems on streams, and biomass units powering agricultural processing. Expert analysis from energy development institutions and African business analysts now confirms that decentralized systems are not just stopgap solutions. They are more adaptable to Africa's demographic spread, more resilient in crisis, and more compatible with renewable energy expansion. Basically, Africa is building an energy architecture designed for the future, not the past. One of the key strengths of decentralized energy is energy sovereignty. Centralized grids depend on large infrastructures that are vulnerable to national instability, conflict, natural disasters, or maintenance failures. A single failure point can plunge millions into darkness. Decentralized systems distribute power generation across many nodes. If one component fails, others continue operating. This increases resilience. It also reduces political and economic vulnerability. When a rural community produces its own energy, it is less dependent on distant power authorities or foreign energy supplies. This strengthens local economies, improves security, and allows communities to control their own development pace. For African countries that have historically relied on expensive fuel imports for centralized generation, decentralization also reduces foreign exchange pressure and improves national energy independence. Another major factor behind Africa's decentralized energy advantage is cost. Solar and storage prices have dropped dramatically over the last decade. Many grids are now cheaper to deploy than extending national transmission lines into remote regions. In many cases, decentralized systems offer faster deployment, lower capital risk, and quicker economic returns for investors. This has attracted global climate funds, green investors, development banks, and private companies into this growing ecosystem. Countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, and Tanzania are already becoming hubs for decentralized solar and hybrid energy projects. Startups are emerging that specialize in modular energy systems, pay-as-you-go solar, and smart grid management for off-grid regions. Decentralized energy is also transforming African agriculture. Many farmers previously lost products due to lack of cold storage and irrigation power. With mini-grid electricity, local communities can run water pumps, refrigeration, processing facilities, and small machinery. This increases productivity, reduces waste, and boosts rural income. This is not just an energy shift, it is an economic multiplier. When energy access increases, education improves because schools have power. Health improves because clinics can refrigerate medicines and operate equipment. Local businesses expand. Digital connectivity improves. Entire local economies begin to function more efficiently. Experts argue that Africa's decentralized energy approach also perfectly fits its demographic reality. Unlike Europe or America, where populations are heavily concentrated in urban zones linked by dense infrastructure, Africa's population is more distributed, with millions living in semi-urban or rural settings. Trying to force a centralized grid model onto that geography wastes money and time. Decentralized systems adapt to this structure instead of fighting it. They are scalable, adjustable, and location-specific. This means Africa is not struggling against its demographic reality. It is using it as part of its strategy. Even more powerful is how decentralized energy integrates with climate goals. Africa contributes very little to global carbon emissions compared to major industrial countries, but it carries some of the heaviest impacts of climate change. By building decentralized renewable systems instead of fossil fuel-dependent centralized plants, Africa is creating a low-carbon development pathway. This positions the continent as a major player in global climate negotiations and green energy transition strategies. It shifts Africa from victim to solution provider in the climate conversation. Another emerging impact is geopolitics. Energy has always been a strategic resource. Countries that control energy flows control economic power. By moving toward decentralized energy, African nations reduce dependency on external energy sources and centralized fossil fuel infrastructure often dominated by foreign interests. This creates political leverage and economic flexibility. Instead of depending on fuel imports, they invest in local sun, wind, water, and biomass. This strengthens sovereignty beyond political speeches. It strengthens it through infrastructure. Africa's decentralized energy model is also influencing how global companies think about future energy frameworks. Energy companies that once focused only on massive centralized generation are now investing in mini-grid technology, modular energy units, and off-grid solutions specifically tested in African environments. These companies understand that Africa is not only a market, it is a testing ground for next-generation energy systems. And the solutions proven there will be exported globally as climate pressures increase. However, challenges remain. Financing structures must continue evolving to support small-scale but large-impact projects. Governments must develop stable regulatory frameworks to attract long-term investment without undermining local ownership. Training and technical education must be scaled so local communities can build, manage, and maintain decentralized systems without permanent foreign dependence. But the direction is clear. The decentralized energy revolution in Africa is not slowing down. It is accelerating. What makes this moment historic is that Africa is not waiting to reach Western standards. It is setting its own standard. A model where energy doesn't depend on massive old grids, where power isn't concentrated in a few industrial zones, and where rural communities are not last in line but part of the core system. A model of distributed power, of local resilience, of technological leapfrogging. And this is not happening in theory. It is happening on the ground, village by village, town by town, region by region. Africa just turned decentralized energy into its secret weapon because it didn't try to copy an outdated system. It built a new one that aligns with its land, its people, its economy, and its future. And as global energy systems face increasing strain from climate change, cyber risks, supply disruptions, and geopolitical shocks, the world is realizing that the most future-proof model might not come from Silicon Valley, Europe, or East Asia. It might come from Africa, built under pressure, forged by necessity, shaped by reality, and now, offering the world a blueprint for a more resilient energy future. You've been watching Africa Geo Trends, where Africa's moves shape the world. That if you haven't already, subscribe now and stay ahead of the next big story.